Welcome, everybody. And we have returned. We are currently on page 40, if you have the book and you're following inside. In the book, The Theory and Practice of Universal Ethics, the Nochai was by Rabbi Dr. Shimon Dovid Cowen. Page 40. So this is in part 1, chapter 2, the realm of reason. Just to remind everybody, pretty much what the author here is doing is he takes various different philosophies and using them, things that he agrees with or disagrees with. Until now, we saw that he is a big fan, if we can say that, of a particular approach, and that is Viktor Frankl. And he then presents over here that the 7 Noachide commandments, the universal Noachide laws, how they fit in, and what's the proper philosophical, rational, or supernatural approach should be to them. Okay, so some of this is quite deep or philosophical, and let's go for it. So we read inside, again, page 40 at the bottom, to the realm of reason. Weber and Kant, rationality and the harmonization of human goals. Whilst consistent with his view of the ultimate subjectivity of human ends, Weber cannot posit an ethic of ends. He at the same time introduced an ethical notion of rationality. In his essay, The Profession and Vocation of Politics, he admired an ethic of responsibility, which states his doctrine of ethical rationality. This Weber contrasts with an ethic of conviction, where substantive ends, i.e. pure value commitments, absolutely and with little sense of consequences, dictate action. Indeed, Weber recognized the value of passionate attachment to ideals in the politician, and that this passion will inevitably be rooted in personal belief. Function of the ethic of responsibility, however, is to moderate these values, these value standpoints with some measure of rationality, as is to be explained. In other words, everybody has their personal leanings just based on who you are. And it's an emotional thing. It's not an intellectual thing. And a lot of times our emotions or who we are affect the logic or the way that we understand things. So he's saying what an individual needs to do is to actually be able to responsibly follow what really is intellectually the right thing to do, even if that's not exactly your personal nature. I think that's pretty much putting it in simple layman terms. Weber himself made approving reference to Kant's ethical doctrine of the categorical imperative, and it is this which invites comparison of the Weberian with the Kantian ethic. Now, Weber's ethic of responsibility is unlike Kant's in certain important respects. It is not, in the words of Wolfgang Schlochter, a cognitivist reflexive ethical principle like that of Kant, which is applied to produce an ethic. This would be established in Kant on the principle of the categorical imperative. And as he puts it, act only on that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. Values for Weber, as noted, much rather represent prior commitments. Rather, Weber's is a critic's reflexive principle. That is to say, one which seeks to make as rational as possible a position which has arisen through belief or personal conviction. In other words, sort of like shooting the arrow and then drawing the target. The idea is you have your own personal conviction, but now you want to try to, have it make sense. Nevertheless, the elements of rational thought in Kant's teaching, freedom, consistency, and repercussion of perspective, do bear consideration for the way in which they are applied in Weber's ethical thought. The role of the Kantinian ethical principle of freedom in Weber's thought is understood with the introduction that, according to Kant, human being has an emotional nature and a rational self. Okay, so we make sort of a split that there are two parts to the individual. There is the emotional nature, which has nothing to do with intellect. It's just the way that we're wired, the way that we are beasts, like animals, that we have instinctive things that we want, that we love, that we fear, etc. And then we have the other part of ourselves, which is the rational self, which is the mind. Then you get into the whole thing of mind over matter, or that the mind can control the heart. Well, there's two separate things. There's the human being that has a mind, and there's the human being that has the heart. So each one of us has both. These belong respectively to the sensible, i.e., emotional, sensual world, and the intellectual, i.e., rational world. Only in the latter world is the human being free, i.e., undriven. It's only if you're going to focus on your intellect. Otherwise, according to him, you don't have free will because you have to behave according to your emotional drive. The concept of ethical duty follows from the fact that this is a law which I give myself and to which I submit because I have given it. This concept of rationality implies an ability and the exercise of the ability to rise above passion and impulse, not to submit uncritically to its dictation, but to accept or reject it freely. So, if I understand correctly, using our mind, we can control our impulse. So without our mind, without the rational self, how are we supposed to control ourselves? And therefore, we would really be not responsible for our actions, like animals. But because we have the mind and the rational self, and we can choose to adhere to what makes sense, so now we do have that responsibility. Passion, as we have noted, is one of the requirements of a politician in Weber's eyes. But this must be equally moderated by responsibility in pursuing an ethical stance. To exercise, in Weber's words, judgment, the ability to maintain one's inner composure and calm while being receptive to realities, in other words, distance from things and people. All right, so therefore, using our mind, using our judgment, we now can be in full control. And basically, a person never has the excuse that I lost it or I got out of control. It should never come to that. We can always be in full control. Secondly, there is the Kantian requirement to think consistently and without contradiction. In Weber, this means thinking through the chain of value assumptions in a political ethical stance, as well as the consequences of all of these values once incorporated into action. In other words, look at the full picture, all the pieces of the puzzle. Indeed, this is one of the first characteristics of rational organizations and of rationality in general. It pursues the consequences of positions and it seeks their formal coherence. Sort of, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but it's sort of playing a game of chess. When you play something of that nature, so you need to think many steps ahead, and you have to see everything, and you need to be in control and do what you believe is best. Same thing in politics or in ethics, that you need to see the full picture, and you have to make your laws and decide based on that. Through it, one comes to know, one, the unavoidable means, and two, the unavoidable consequences, as well as three, the thereby incurred conflict of various possible value responses with one another in terms of their practical consequences. Okay, so you're living in a world with other people, with other individuals and groups. So you have to take everything into consideration and see how does all that work, what is best for everyone. Now, it's pretty much going against the human nature of not just survival, but selfishness or indulgence or dog eat dog and just be, a wild jungle. In relation to the third aspect of Kantian rational thinking, it would appear that Weber departs from the Kantian notion of universalability expressed in Kant's notion of the categorical imperative. For this notion was set up formally to establish principles of action, whereas for Weber, value positions cannot be ultimately grounded. Rather, Weber appreciates an ethic which comprehends non-agreement and seeks clearly to delineate and discuss the area of difference. In other words, let's not avoid our differences. On the contrary, let's put everything on the table and let's discuss them and let's deal with our differences. In the context of necessarily collisional viewpoints, it is not a matter of understanding or forgiving the other, but rather to know that why and in which areas one cannot come to an understanding. So some people say, live and let live, or agree to disagree. That's not exactly what we're saying over here. We say we have to understand what our differences is and why can we not come to a common ground or compromise, or why can I not accept your view? In one place, Weber puts it thus: to what extent a goal justifies unavoidable means, and so also the other consideration, to what extent undesirable consequences will have to be assumed, as well as finally how conflict between several desired or necessary goals which come concretely into conflict with each other can be managed. This, in plain terms, is the issue of choice or compromise. What remains of Kantian universalability, as above in Weber's work, in Schluchter's phrase, has to do with an ethic of value discussion. The universalizing principle as a principle of critical examination requires an ethic of dialogue. The basic principle of such an ethic of dialogue can be formulated in an analogy to Kant's philosophy of religion in the following manner. You ought to move from the ethical state of nature, where your conviction is continuously threatened by self-deception, to the state of concrete value discussions, because the latter are capable of producing self-clarification and a sense of responsibility, both of which have to be pursued by anyone seeking to satisfy the imperative to be rational. So again, because we're all so naturally self-centered and interested in self-gratification and so forth, you have to be able to shift away from that. And you have to be able to look at it objectively, so to say, or in a completely rational way. I mean, one very simple exercise or form to do this is to remove yourself from the equation, meaning look at it as an outsider. Whatever the philosophy we're talking about, whatever political stance we're talking about, so take yourself out of it and look at it that it's someone else, or these two opinions. It's not me versus the other guy. It's A versus B. And then it's easier to deal with it on a rational way. The task of the ethical person is to reduce the one-sidedness of one standpoint, to modify it in the sense of displaying a universal regard for other persons and their possessions, notwithstanding one's commitment to a personal goal. It is this which mediates value with rationality. Okay. The Noahide laws, rationality and worldly integration of the divine. The features of rationality found in secular ethics. Now remember, everyone talks about ethics, and everybody wants to be ethical. Everybody wants to do what's right and moral and ethical. Okay, so this secular ethics, which discussed above, freedom of intellect from passion or drivenness, the probing for consistency and the harmonization of perspectives, all find their counterpart in the Noahide laws. Okay, so if you want to be able to be truly ethical, you'll find it in the Noahide laws. The difference is that we're not dealing here with autonomous individual wills and purposes, but rather the individual parts which humans have in the divine purpose as themselves having been created in the divine image. If you remember, spoke a lot about the fact that we're created in the image of the divine. So basically, the problem that one can have with, before we get to this point, is that how do I really know what's rational, what makes sense, and what's right? So he says, now we have the major component, which is, well, what's God's will? And then it makes no difference whether I'm comfortable with it, whether it suits my passion or my natural drive. Doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even matter that I don't rationally understand it. But since every one of us has that little divine spark, because we are made in the image of God, therefore, we can relate to it. The Kantian notion of freedom is connected with the sovereignty of intellect. Okay, that's his point that we spoke about, that the mind can control the heart, that it's all about intellect. This is meritorious in as much as it signifies the sovereignty of reason over drivenness. Okay, so that's good for that you're able to control and rule with the mind. But from a Noahide point of view, it is insufficient, this Kant's approach. Why? Intellect must take its first principles from somewhere. Right? But you're saying it makes sense. What makes sense? Who decided what's logical? If not from unreflected passion or ultimately unquestioned assumptions and predispositions, then from some other unquestionable, non-rational, and yet true source. The Noahide laws here open up the vista of the service of God, in freeing itself from the drivenness of emotion. Intellect should now and next become receptive to the knowledge of the soul, the imitation of the divine. Moreover, only when intellect has first subordinated itself to the soul and to the information of the soul, its belief based on its seeing and affinity with the divine, does it fully free itself from the sway, the bribery of emotional and dispositional biases. In other words, yes, it's true that the mind has to rule over the heart, and we do agree that there's two parts to us. There's the part that's like an animal, and it's just instinct, and we have to control that with rational. The problem is when you say that the highest point of a human being is his mind and his rationality, well, then there's a problem, because in understanding, not everybody understands the same thing. And one person intellectually will say is right and ethical, the other person will say the opposite. So there has to be something higher than intelligence that it's an unquestionable. Now, what would that be? So we, as believers, understand and accept religiously that it's the divine will of God, which he has revealed to us and given us in the Torah. So now we know what we need to accept. And yes, it needs to come into our rational understanding. But it's not that it starts off in the mind. It starts with belief, with faith, which is beyond intellect. It is, moreover, through self-subjugation to a common spiritual source that the possibility of the unification, articulation, and harmonization of individuals becomes real. So you have to have that self-negate, that self-subjugation. When the purpose and concern of individuals is of one kind, one has the grounds on which unity is feasible. This is neither a historically relative, substantive, which would be the Weberian way, or an abstract formal, the Kantian, ethics. So we're rejecting both of them, even though they both have certain points and credit, but he says you can't go with either Weber or Kant. It is an intellectual alignment with the imitation of God. This is known as the properly attuned intellectual soul. Basically, as you can even see in all of his references in this section over here, the footnotes, like one by one, I mean, starting with 23 and on, what he's really doing is he's taking, Rabbi Dr. Cowen is taking the absolute philosophy, if you will, of Hasidus, and presenting the universal Noahide commandments through the light of that deepest part of the Torah, of the Hasidus. And that's the ultimate truth and the ultimate perfect philosophy of Torah. And other philosophers, whoever they may be, have certain points, but we have to reject the parts which are incorrect. So he's that which, we said before, that we have two parts to us. That is what Hasidus says as well. But now he's introducing to us, or using the term called the intellectual soul. And that is exactly what it is called in Tanya and throughout Hasidus, that we have an intellectual soul. The attuned or divinely tutored intellectual soul further becomes an instrument for the prospective regulation of human existence in the application, extension, and protection of Noahide laws. Indeed, the sages said, had the divine law not been given, we would have learned modesty from the cat and the prohibition of theft from the ant. Okay, that's what the Talmud states, which cooperatively maintains order within its colony. That's the way the ants, if you ever watched how they work, it's amazing. You can watch how they so we would learn about not stealing, about theft, just by observing something as simple and as lowly, so to say, as ants. Intellect would have selected and utilized these models. Indeed, forms of behavior which the healthy intellect deems requisite, such as the keeping of one's word and additional strictures assumed to protect moral standards, become mandatory as Noahide laws. So yes, there is the concept of intellect, and yes, it does make sense. The Noahide laws are secondly associated with the allaying of conflict. This is the aspect of rationality, which in Raburian terms thinks through the consequences for oneself and others and of one's individual position. The opposition to conflict is expressed in the notion of settledness, that is, of purposeful, constructive, and hence cooperative activity, in the goal of the habitation of the world. Okay, that the world is not a jungle and we have to have this world properly inhabited. Or as the verse states, that the world was created not for chaos, but to be settled in Isaiah. This is, and that verse actually becomes like a very big heading for all of the related, the Noahide commandments and what they're related to. This is further intimated in that the Noahide laws are negative laws, right? As we point out many times, 6 out of 7 of them are negative, which mitigate conditions of disorder, not to blaspheme, not to steal, not to murder, and so forth. Noahide law opposes barbarism. It seeks to create order by opposing chaotic phenomena. It wants human beings not to be engaged in destructive and socially disintegrative activities. Consistency in the moral realm, as Weber abstracts this Kantian category, as concern for the conflictual consequences of one's moral position, has its counterpart in the Noahide laws in the sense in which one's service of God has to sit with and in a worldly order. The regard for others is motivated by the notion that one's service of God should be accommodated in the world. So everything that we're doing, it all has to fit. It's not like it seems like at times there's a contradiction or a struggle between serving God and the world. But ultimately, it has to all fit into the world because God created this world, and our observance of these laws is in order for us not just to benefit from this world, but it's deeper than that. It's really to fulfill God's will of why he created the world. So of course it has to fit with the world. Finally, there is the sense in which, not simply negatively as opposing disorder, which is what we said, commandments are pretty much all negatives. They're don't do this, don't do that. But positively, the Noahide laws are intended to implant peace in the world, which is a very positive thing. This concept of peace has to do with the palpable presence of the divine and the harmony of humanity within itself and with nature, which goes with it. It is explained by the Maharal of Prague. He was a very, very great Jewish thinker. He was a Kabbalist, and he lived in Prague, and very, very famous for many things. So the Maharal of Prague, he explains that at the beginning of the creation, the divine presence rested. There was a manifestation of godliness in the world. The condition for this was the observance of the Noahide laws. Through the transgression of these laws, the divine presence departed by degrees from the world. It was not until the revelation at Sinai that the divine presence returned to the world. It took the totality of the revelation of the 613 commandments given to the Jewish people and the Noahide laws, which were also reiterated at Sinai for humanity at large, to effect this reconnection. The retrieval of this state and the ascent beyond it is the work of Jews through their commandments and of all humanity with the Noahide laws. The quality of that heightened peace suffused with the divine is expressed in the words of Maimonides. And these are actually what he says in the end of his entire Magni Opus, the entire Mishnah Torah, Yad HaChazaka, the end of the laws of kings, at the final law in the end of the laws of King Mashiach. In that era, referring to the Messianic time, there will be neither famine nor war, envy or competition, for good will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be as common as dust. The occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God. So basically, we're explaining here why the only way to truly have real harmony and real peace internationally and individually is with the acceptance and the keeping of these divine laws, the 7 Noahide codes. It would be sort of like if I was speaking to Jews, so philosophically explaining to them the only way that a Jew can have true happiness or true self-fulfillment is by observing the laws, by keeping the commandments. Even though one may make the argument and say, oh no, I'm very happy. I don't keep this, and I'm very happy. That's very temporary, and it's not true. Not only that, some people fool themselves, and they're not aware of their true feelings or their true emotional state. Many of us, many people, to one degree or another, but you have people that can actually go through life, and I can give all sorts of examples that I know people firsthand. I'm sure many of you can come up with examples in people that you know. Countless examples. I'll just pick, for instance, some people have certain shortcomings or certain negative character traits that they are clueless about, and everyone else doesn't understand. How do they not see? Just look in the mirror. It's not like it's some deep, dark secret. For example, there are certain people which lie as if it's going out of style. It's not just when they feel the need or they're in a tough situation, they're not going to live up to what the verse says, that, distance yourself from any falsehood and from any lie. No. They'll lie when there's nothing to gain. It's like incredible. So there must be a term for that. A person who is a patho, whatever. The person's simply a liar when they really don't gain anything, and they don't realize it. And then we say, "Oh, come on! Of course they realize it. They just are stuck, or they don't want to change it, or what?" No, it comes to a point. You see, the person's not aware. They're not aware of the obvious, and there's countless examples like that. So just because a person, not just temporarily, that for a couple of years seems he's happy, and then he's going to realize the truth. There are people that have gone through a long life, and they don't even realize that they never had true happiness. So again, there are many factors, but for a Jew, if he does not observe and keep the commandments, he cannot truly be happy. It's only temporary, and more so, it's not even real. Similarly, I would say that for a Noahide, the harmony, the peace, the happiness is at best incomplete without keeping the 7 Noahide commandments. Now, that was always the case, even before our generation, where it became available and became a campaign and became well known and so forth. Which means to say that, yes, for many, many generations, for thousands of years, the world, for the most part, could have been going through life, history, without having any true feeling of self-fulfillment. Sounds very extreme, a very radical thing, but I think that's pretty much true. Now you're going to say, well, what about a person who doesn't know? He's unaware, doesn't know that there's 7 Noahide commandments. He's just simply unaware. It's very sad. It's like saying, whatever a person is unaware of what true happiness is. A person was brought up in a certain society or in a certain family in certain conditions, and they don't even know that they're living such a rotten life and that there is happiness and there are opportunities out there. Well, that's very sad. And they may not even have a choice in those conditions and in that circumstance, but it doesn't change the fact. So again, same thing. We should feel a responsibility to promote and publicize and teach the divine code, the 7 Noahide commandments and all that goes with it. Be it this book, this class, that class, this lecture, that lecture, whatever it may be, however it may be. Not only for the main reason, which is because this is what God wants, and this is his world, and he has a purpose, and that's what needs to be accomplished, so we have to get everybody on board. That's the main reason. Aside for that, simply for the benefit of each individual, for every community, for every society, and for every individual. They can only have a truly proper and good and happy life with the divine code. Any questions or comments? Let's open up for discussion.
Yes, Rabbi.
Go ahead.
There seems to be some confusion, I think, in the ranks of the growing Noahide community about what it means for a Noahide to actually teach another Noahide. I mean, nobody seems to kind of understand that we can either do it or we can't do it. Many of us are confused about some of the aspects of that. I'll just say it like that. When you say that the responsibility is to forward these laws forward to whoever, wherever, I mean, when we develop our institutions and our non-for-profits, like say the Noahide community of Chicago, we want to provide books to Noahides who can't get them wherever they are in the world. So this is us doing our part to try to push that forward. Now, say if some of us decide to teach the divine code after we've learned it from one of you guys, I mean, is that permissible? You know, those are the things that a lot of people are asking right now.
Absolutely permissible. And the divine, it's like anything else, that if you have the knowledge, you teach it. In other words, it's not, there's a balance here. Let's put it that way. On the one hand, primarily, it is not, for instance, in the United States, let's say, it's illegal to practice medicine if you're not an MD. You need to be licensed, and some doctors lose their license for whatever reason. For such a person to practice medicine or to get paid for giving medical advice, I think, I don't know all the intrinsic details, but basically that's illegal. It is illegal for a person who's not an MD to take money for giving medical advice. Now, what about alternative and holistic? Okay, so that's a whole different thing. So the argument is that that's not medication. I'm not prescribing any medicine. I'm telling a person eat these herbs. I'm telling a person go take walks. I'm telling a person eat these vitamins. Okay, so that gets into a whole. But otherwise, if you're not a surgeon by having this thing hanging on your wall, framed certificate, you can't operate in the operating room. Okay, now, that's not the case. That's not the case. You don't have to be trained or have graduated or get a certificate from the Ask Noah or from this organization, the other organization, that you are now a Noahide who can teach. No. If someone knows A, he can teach A. Someone knows A and B, teach A and B. If you know very well 2 out of the 7, you don't have to wait till you know all 7. Teach the 2 that you do know. That's primarily my point. However, when I say there has to be a balance, we all have to know our limitations, and we have to understand that I'm not an expert in the field. So just because I'm assisting you or I'm teaching you what I know, especially if we're using a text of someone who is learned in that, so therefore, if I get to a point where I'm unsure, I cannot view myself as an authority. And then we have to go back, which ultimately would go, back to whichever rabbis of our generation that this is their field. Because, as we've spoken a while ago, they're different experts within the authorities, within Jewish law, in different areas. Not every rabbi is perfectly well-versed in every subject of Jewish law. I mean, that they're far and few like that. Some people, their expertise is this area, and they have some knowledge in the other areas, but they will be the first to send you to someone else for the other. So I think in our generation, or at this time, at least the one who's in the forefront and everything, is one of them at least, is Rabbi Moshe Weiner from the Divine Code. And when he wrote he was constantly in touch and asking many questions with one of the leading Jewish rabbis of the generation as far as Jewish law is concerned, and that was a great rabbi who's no longer with us, Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg in the land of Israel. And that's why in his footnotes in the Hebrew of the code of Jewish of the Noahide, the code, he quotes this Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah very often. So there you have someone who was an authority, but doesn't mean we can't teach it. It just means that we need to be cautious when it gets to anything which is, complicated. Because again, just like in any law, so too in Torah law, and so too for the Noahide. There's the theory, and then there's the application. It's not always very simple. Let me just give one example. Are we pro or against abortion? Can you answer that in one word? Of course, we're opposed. We're against. However, there are exceptions. There are times where it is permissible and times where it is mandatory. Now, I know that in the movement, there are some extreme people, not within the Noahide world, but some extreme people, which they say never, abortion is not allowed ever. Torah doesn't agree with that. So when it comes to an actual real case if someone was to come and ask me and say, Rabbi, can I have an abortion? I would not dare give a ruling. That is beyond my pay scale. That is beyond my expertise. I would send them to a higher level rabbi who deals with such severe, serious, literally life and death issues. I'm not going to take that. I don't have such broad shoulders. And that's just one example. So, it's the same thing would apply to any one of the Noahide commandments or anything, when it comes to practical application, we have to be able to ask, even if I can look it up in the book and say, oh, look what it says here. If you're dealing with something very serious like that, you have to always double check. So I know it was a little bit of a lengthy answer, but that's, I think it's important. And on the one hand, yes, we're all teachers, we all can promote it, especially you can tell people which books to read. You can sell these books to people, and on the other hand, we have to know our limitations.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I just want to come back with how does that play into us establishing places for us to meet together?
Meeting together is a very good thing because it's very necessary. One of the big problems that most places are lacking is a community, an organized community in one way or another, simply to come together on many levels. Number one, it's very hard for a person to be all alone and to feel that I'm in this myself. You get together and you have a group of people together with you, and they're on the same page. And then you can all discuss your challenges and how you came to this point, and what do you do at the place of work. And then this one says, well, my parents don't really get me. This is my spouse doesn't really get me. This is my children don't really get me. How do you deal with it? What do we do? So that's on one level. And then in addition to that, have study sessions to study about the 7 Noahide commandments. Of course, it's a very good thing, and it's a very necessary thing. And I guess we can take it certain places that have successfully established such things. For example, what I'm aware of is in the Philippines and in South America. I don't know if it's in Argentina or which country. I know the shaliach. I know the rabbi there. He has a whole community, and they get together and they pray together, and the rabbi is like, oversees it, but they're pretty much, on their own. His name is, my mind is with a G. First letter of his last name was with a G. So yeah, that would be how I view such a group or an organization.
That kind of blows the lid off of what a lot of the folks are saying out there. Is like they're all scared to meet because they're worried about starting another religion. But thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Nick,
you're on.
Hi, Rabbi. What would be your advice for interacting with family itself?
The family? Is that what you said?
I think so.
Interacting with family?
Yes.
First of all, I think every case needs to be addressed individually to know all of the details and all the nuances. But in general, to be respectful and to be tolerant that they simply are not where you're at, wherever point you're at, they just don't get it. And depending on how open they are, initially, just be respectful and don't expect them to get it. However, you have to have your lines that you will not cross, like, certain things. If they want you to participate and it's a problem because it is idolatry related, then you just can't. And if they say, yeah, but it's family, so you can say, well, I need to ask my rabbi and get back to you. It doesn't mean that you could do anything that your parents or whoever wants you to do, but you have to understand that they simply don't get it. So you got to be respectful.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
If no one else has something, I just got a question. You said something about us being able to sell, like, say, books to other Noahides. Are we allowed to sell Noahide related material that promotes our faith, like T-shirts, just little models of arts and things like that?
Like what? Well, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Like different type of merchandise that promotes the Noahide faith, like little arcs or T-shirts with slogans on them and things like that. Are we allowed to sell stuff? I see they have some stuff like that on Ask Noah, but not a lot.
I see no problem, and on the contrary, if you want to have a T-shirt that says "I am a Noahide, what about you?" or something like that, or "Keep the 7," no problem. Make a bumper sticker, 7 for 70, whatever, no problem. That's a way of promoting it, or at least, or you put a bumper sticker, or you put a billboard, or on your what's it called, profile, or whatever it's called. You put
Social
over there,
media platform,
right? Put a website where they can go to. Sure, that's great. That's one way of getting people, on board.
Thank you.
Anyone else? So I guess that wraps it up for today. So we are looking at next week. So we're up to page 48. Part 1, chapter 2, intellect, the final part, number 3, the rightness of reason. Okay. Yeah. So hope you all have a safe and healthy continued winter, and there should be peace for everyone.
Amen.
That's it. We all got to do what we got to do, and the main thing is Mashiach now.
Amen.
Be well,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
We're looking at the regular time next week, back to our regular schedule.
8 o'clock next week.